Saturday mornings in the 1970s were a sacred ritual. The glow of the TV, cereal bowls balanced on knees, and worlds of color, music, and imagination unfolding before wide-eyed children. But many of those shows, once beloved, have slipped into shadows of memory. Do you remember them? Let's revisit 25 forgotten Saturday morning cartoons from the 1970s and the stories behind their rise and fall. The Amazing Chan and the Chan Clan, 1972. When Hanna-Barbera adapted the famous Chinese detective Charlie Chan into a Saturday morning cartoon, expectations were high. The show debuted in 1972 with Charlie Chan leading his 10 children on globe-trotting adventures filled with mystery-solving and comic relief. On paper, it sounded like a hit, part Scooby-Doo formula, part international intrigue. But the execution told a different story. Despite the cultural moment, the series faced heavy criticism for leaning on broad stereotypes, a common blind spot of the era. Even more troubling, voice actors for the Asian characters were initially all white, a decision that sparked backlash. Producers quickly recast with Asian American actors, an almost unheard-of concession for the time. But the damage had already been done. Adding to the troubles, the large cast of children made the stories chaotic, leaving audiences struggling to connect with individual characters. Ratings dwindled quickly, and the show was canceled after just one season. Yet, for a brief moment, the Amazing Chan and the Chan Clan tried to expand the boundaries of Saturday morning television. Today, it's remembered as both an ambitious experiment and a cautionary tale of representation mishandled. Forgotten by most, it remains a strange cultural relic where progress and stereotypes collided on the Saturday morning stage. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids, 1973. In the early 1970s, Hollywood was still buzzing from the success of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, 1969. Hanna-Barbera, never shy about chasing trends, decided to transform the outlaw duo into a teen pop band? The result was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids, a bizarre mashup of music, mystery, and bubblegum antics. This version of Butch was no gunslinger, but a shaggy-haired bandleader with his friends and a pet dog, gallivanting around the world, solving crimes between performances. Each episode featured groovy tunes reminiscent of The Archies, with choreographed band sequences animated to mimic real performances. Behind the scenes, the production leaned heavily on the mystery-solving teens formula Hanna-Barbera had already perfected. Yet, its connection to the outlaw names felt tone-deaf, alienating adults while leaving kids puzzled by the oddly borrowed title. The show ran only one season, never quite finding its audience. Today, it's remembered mostly for its infectious theme song and as an example of how the 1970s tried to recycle counterculture icons for bubblegum pop appeal. A cartoon that once tried to bridge outlaw cool with Saturday morning innocence now lingers as a forgotten experiment, one that felt off-key from the start. Sealab 2020, 1972, long before its Adult Swim parody counterpart, Sealab 2020 began as a serious adventure series. Set in an underwater research station, the show imagined a future where scientists and explorers worked to preserve Earth's oceans. With ecological messages woven into every plot, it was one of Hanna-Barbera's earliest attempts to blend entertainment with environmental awareness. Yet, despite its good intentions, Sealab 2020 never made a splash. Its stories were heavy-handed, often feeling more like lectures than adventures. Kids wanted fast-paced hijinks, not lessons about ocean pollution or climate change, concepts far ahead of their time for a Saturday morning audience. The show lasted only 13 episodes before fading into obscurity. But decades later, it resurfaced in cult fashion when Cartoon Network's Sealab 2021 turned the original footage into a biting parody. Ironically, the parody gained more recognition than the earnest original ever did. Today, Sealab 2020 stands as a forgotten pioneer, a show that dared to teach, only to sink under the weight of its own seriousness. Devlin, 1974 to 1976. In the wake of Evel Knievel's daredevil stunts dominating headlines, Hanna-Barbera unveiled Devlin, the story of motorcycle stuntman Ernie Devlin and his siblings. Part circus act, part family drama, the show leaned into America's obsession with daredevil culture while trying to maintain a wholesome, family-friendly vibe. On screen, Devlin risked his life in dangerous stunts, only to segue into moral lessons about honesty, courage, or responsibility. The formula felt awkward. Audiences tuned in for thrills, not sermons. Critics noted that the show seemed torn between being edgy and being safe, and the tension showed. Behind the scenes, animators struggled to capture the excitement of live stunt work in limited Saturday morning animation. The motorcycle jumps often looked clunky, robbing the show of the danger that made Knievel so magnetic. Despite these flaws, Devlin ran for 2 seasons, a rare longevity for a Saturday morning show without a toy line or hit records backing it. Today, it survives mostly as trivia, the Evel Knievel cartoon that failed to rev its engines. A show that tried to leap over cars and buses, but landed softly in the haystack of forgotten Saturday mornings. Clue Club, 1976 to 1977. Hanna-Barbera returned again to its tried-and-true mystery-solving formula, with Clue Club, a show about 4 young sleuths and their talking bloodhounds, Woofer and Whimper. Clearly inspired by Scooby-Doo, the show aimed to replicate its predecessor's success by doubling down on detective work. The series had all the ingredients: teenagers with gadgets, bumbling but lovable dogs, and weekly mysteries. But Clue Club never stood out. Viewers compared it unfavorably to Scooby-Doo, labeling it a knockoff. Even the canine sidekicks felt derivative, lacking the charm and personality of Scooby himself. Behind the scenes, producers hoped the show would benefit from the growing appetite for mysteries, but kids seemed fatigued by endless Monster of the Week stories. Ratings lagged, and after just 16 episodes, the show disappeared from schedules. Still, Clue Club has its defenders. For some, it represents the last wave of innocence before the genre grew stale. For most, it's simply another forgotten name in the crowded pantheon of Saturday morning mysteries. The Roman Holidays, 1972. When Hanna-Barbera created the Flintstones and the Jetsons, they struck gold by transplanting the sitcom format into unusual eras. Hoping to recapture that spark, they launched the Roman Holidays in 1972. Set in ancient Rome, the show followed the Holiday family, who lived in an apartment building managed by a cranky landlord and navigated day-to-day suburban life, only with togas and chariots instead of jeans and cars. The show opened with a catchy theme song and attempted to replicate the modern family in a different-era gimmick. But unlike the Flintstones, whose Stone Age gags felt relatable, the Roman Holidays never connected with audiences. Roman culture was too distant for children to grasp, and the humor felt like a pale imitation of the formula that had worked before. Behind the scenes, animators reused much of the studio's stock character designs and jokes. Critics dismissed it as the Flintstones in togas, and even younger viewers found it uninspired. Despite some inventive attempts, like Romanized takes on television sets or pets styled after mythological beasts, the show couldn't hold on to ratings and was canceled after 13 episodes. Today, the Roman Holidays is mostly remembered as Hanna-Barbera's weakest entry in their sitcom family trilogy. Forgotten by most, it stands as proof that lightning doesn't always strike twice, especially when the formula feels more recycled than reimagined. Wheelie and the Chopper Bunch, 1974 to 1975. At the height of America's obsession with cars and motorcycles, Hanna-Barbera rolled out Wheelie and the Chopper Bunch. It starred Wheelie, a red Volkswagen Beetle, and his girlfriend Rhoda Ree, who constantly found themselves harassed by a gang of talking motorcycles known as the Chopper Bunch. The show leaned into slapstick antics, with Wheelie using his wits to outsmart the bullies each week. While some children loved the colorful vehicles and the comedic chases, critics saw the series as a shameless knockoff of Disney's Herbie the Love Bug. The resemblance was no coincidence. The Love Bug films were box office hits, and Hanna-Barbera hoped to siphon off some of that popularity. Behind the scenes, the limited animation style couldn't keep pace with the fast, vehicle-based comedy. Car chases looked stiff, and the humor relied too heavily on recycled gags. Still, the sound design gave the vehicle's personality with the chopper bunch's growls and grumbles, leaving an impression on some nostalgic fans. Wheelie and the Chopper Bunch lasted one season, its memory fading almost as quickly as it appeared. Yet, for a brief moment, it mirrored America's fascination with cars and motorcycles, showing how even Saturday morning cartoons weren't immune to trends roaring down the cultural highway. Goober and the Ghostchasers, 1973. By the early 1970s, Hanna-Barbera had perfected the teenagers solve mysteries with their funny animal sidekick, Formula. Goober and the Ghostchasers was another entry in this crowded field, featuring a Great Dane named Goober who could turn invisible whenever frightened, a gimmick meant to differentiate him from Scooby-Doo. Each week, Goober and his human pals investigated supposedly haunted locations, often bumping into guest appearances from real-life bubblegum pop stars like the Partridge Kids. This cross-promotion was supposed to boost ratings by combining cartoons with teen idols, but it often felt forced. Behind the scenes, writers struggled to give Goober a unique identity beyond his invisibility shtick. Animation limitations meant his disappearing act looked awkward, and jokes fell flat when half the screen simply erased the dog. Critics dismissed it as a Scooby-Doo imitation, and audiences seemed to agree, with the series ending after just 16 episodes. Today, Goober and the Ghostchasers is remembered only faintly, often as a trivia note about Hanna-Barbera's endless attempts to replicate Scooby's success. It stands as an example of how formula fatigue can doom even the most well-meaning cartoons. Inch High, Private Eye, 1973. This curious cartoon followed Inch High, a pint-sized detective working for the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Standing only an inch tall, Inch High solved mysteries with the help of his niece and her boyfriend, relying on his size to sneak into places no full-sized detective could. On paper, it was clever, a mix of crime-solving and slapstick. In practice, the jokes wore thin. Most episodes leaned on predictable sight gags, with inch-high climbing typewriters, hiding in teacups, or dodging stomping feet. Kids chuckled at the premise, but the humor wasn't strong enough to keep them watching week after week. Behind the scenes, animators enjoyed designing oversized props and settings to emphasize Inch's tiny stature. But this novelty couldn't sustain a long-running show. Adding to its troubles, some parents criticized the character's bumbling nature, fearing it made detective work look foolish rather than heroic. The series ran for 13 episodes before vanishing. Still, Inch High, Private Eye lingers in nostalgia circles as a charming, if lightweight entry in Hanna-Barbera's vast catalog. Forgotten by most, it remains a reminder that even the smallest ideas need big stories to survive. The Funky Phantom, 1971 to 1972. When Scooby-Doo became a runaway hit, Hanna-Barbera rushed to produce clones. One of the earliest was The Funky Phantom, which featured 3 teenagers, their dog, and a Revolutionary War-era ghost named Jonathan Wellington, Mudsie Muddlemore. Accidentally released from a grandfather clock, Mudsie joins the gang to solve mysteries while offering comic relief. Audiences immediately noticed the resemblance to Scooby-Doo right down to the ghost's voice, which was almost identical to Hanna-Barbera staple Snagglepuss. Though Mudsie's Revolutionary War background was unique, the series rarely used it in storytelling, relying instead on recycled haunted house plots. Behind the scenes, the show was produced quickly to capitalize on Scooby's momentum, and the rushed writing showed. Ratings lagged, and critics complained that the series lacked originality. It was canceled after one season, airing only 17 episodes. Yet The Funky Phantom has a strange afterlife. Some fans remember it fondly for its spooky atmosphere and historical twist, while others dismiss it as a shameless imitation. Forgotten by most, it remains one of the many ghostly footprints left in Scooby-Doo's oversized shadow. Hong Kong Phooey, 1974 to 1976. When Hong Kong Phooey hit Saturday mornings in 1974, it looked like a surefire hit. Voiced by the legendary Scatman Crothers, the show followed mild-mannered janitor Penrod Penry Pooch, who transformed into a bumbling kung fu crime fighter. The series leaned heavily on martial arts mania, sweeping the U.S. thanks to Bruce Lee and the popularity of kung fu films. Kids loved the catchy theme song, slapstick gags, and Penry's karate chop antics. But critics quickly pointed out the show's reliance on outdated stereotypes, both cultural and comedic. Behind the scenes, Hanna-Barbera designed it as a spoof rather than a serious martial arts show, but the humor often veered into caricature. Still, the real charm came from Scatman Crothers, whose voice gave the title character warmth and personality. Despite the clumsy fight scenes, children adored Phooey's optimism and underdog appeal. The show ran for 16 episodes, recycled heavily in reruns for years afterward. Though fondly remembered by some, others dismiss it as a relic of its time, where martial arts fascination clashed with cartoon stereotypes. Forgotten by many in the modern era, Hong Kong Phooey remains an odd cultural snapshot of the 1970s, when kung fu ruled the box office and even Saturday mornings wanted a piece of the action. The Barkleys, 1972, inspired by Norman Lear's socially conscious sitcoms like All in the Family, the Barkleys reimagined that formula with anthropomorphic dogs. Debuting in 1972, it followed Arnie Barkley, his wife Agnes, and their children as they navigated family squabbles and generational clashes. On the surface, it looked like a wholesome family comedy. But beneath the wagging tails, the show tackled surprisingly weighty themes: responsibility, finances, and respect between generations. The creators hoped children might connect with the Barkleys' warmth, while adults chuckled at the sly satire. Unfortunately, the series struggled to find its audience. Kids often found the social commentary dull compared to action-packed adventures offered by other cartoons. Adults, meanwhile, didn't tune in to Saturday mornings for satire. They had sitcoms in prime time for that. Behind the scenes, Hanna-Barbera's team admired the idea of parodying sitcom trends, but with only 13 episodes produced, the experiment was short-lived. Despite its brief run, the Barkleys hinted at how cartoons could blend humor with heart, even if it never found a lasting home in pop culture. Today, it's a forgotten curiosity, proof that not every experiment in socially aware animation could resonate with young viewers craving fun over family arguments. Valley of the Dinosaurs, 1974 to 1976. Riding the wave of prehistoric fascination sparked by Land of the Lost, Hanna-Barbera introduced Valley of the Dinosaurs in 1974. The show followed the Butler family, who were swept into a mysterious canyon where dinosaurs and cavemen still roamed. The premise promised thrilling adventure, giant creatures, survival drama, and primitive technology. Yet, in execution, the show often leaned too heavily on educational messages about cooperation and science, slowing down the action. Children, expecting non-stop dinosaur battles, were sometimes bored by the lectures tucked between adventures. Behind the scenes, the creators were inspired by a desire to mix fun with learning, believing dinosaurs could teach kids about survival, family unity, and even basic archaeology. The animation team worked tirelessly to design diverse dinosaur species, though budget constraints limited their detail. The series lasted 16 episodes before disappearing into obscurity, overshadowed by Land of the Lost's more daring live-action thrills. Today, Valley of the Dinosaurs is remembered faintly by those who caught it in reruns, but for most, it's another fossil in Hanna-Barbera's crowded graveyard of Saturday morning experiments. Jabberjaw, 1976 to 1978. What if Scooby-Doo was a talking shark? That was essentially the premise behind Jabberjaw. The show followed a group of teenage musicians traveling the underwater world in the year 2076, accompanied by their oversized, goofy shark named Jabberjaw, who craved respect and cracked jokes in a Curly from the Three Stooges voice. The series tried to merge futuristic sci-fi settings with music, comedy, and the ever-reliable mystery-solving template. Its underwater worlds were visually ambitious, but the recycled gags, Jabberjaw bumbling through danger, villains unmasked Scooby-style, felt overly familiar. Behind the scenes, animators borrowed heavily from previous Hanna-Barbera designs, while Jabberjaw himself became a mix of novelty and annoyance. Critics derided the show as Scooby-Doo in a wetsuit, but its catchy theme song gave it a brief cult following. Despite airing only 16 episodes, Jabberjaw resurfaced in syndication for years. Today, it's a quirky footnote, a series that proved even talking sharks couldn't escape Scooby-Doo's enormous shadow. Forgotten by most, Jabberjaw occasionally reappears in parody or cameos, reminding fans of the bizarre creativity that once dominated Saturday mornings. These Are the Days, 1974 to 1975. Departing from slapstick and mystery formulas, These Are the Days offered a slice-of-life look at a family living in a small American town during the early 1900s. The series followed the Day family as they navigated simple joys and challenges, school, work, friendships, and small-town community life. The show was gentle, almost pastoral, with slower pacing and a focus on moral lessons. Critics praised it as wholesome and heartfelt, comparing it to The Waltons or Little House on the Prairie. But children tuning in on Saturday mornings often found it too slow. In an era dominated by superheroes, ghosts, and talking animals, These Are the Days felt more like homework than entertainment. Behind the scenes, Hanna-Barbera hoped to capture a sense of nostalgia and Americana, producing lush backgrounds and a warm atmosphere. But without flashy gimmicks or broad comedy, the show couldn't compete. It was canceled after just 16 episodes. Today, These Are the Days is rarely remembered, but those who do recall it speak of its charm and sincerity. In a landscape of gimmick-heavy cartoons, it dared to slow down and tell stories about ordinary life, even if that meant being forgotten. The Harlem Globetrotters Popcorn Machine, 1974. By the mid-'70s, the Harlem Globetrotters had already starred in their own cartoon, but Hanna-Barbera decided to double down with the Harlem Globetrotters Popcorn Machine. This time, the show blended live-action segments with animated skits, music, and comedy, an experimental format meant to expand their brand beyond basketball antics. Children expected slapstick and sports hijinks, but instead got a variety-style program with skits and songs that often felt disjointed. The concept tried to capture the Globetrotters' charisma, but the awkward mix of formats never clicked. Kids were left puzzled, wondering whether they were supposed to be watching a cartoon, a concert, or a comedy show. Behind the scenes, the production was rushed to capitalize on the team's popularity, but the lack of focus doomed it from the start. Unlike the original Globetrotters cartoon, which leaned into their playful athletic image, Popcorn Machine was neither funny enough for comedy nor engaging enough for music. The series fizzled after a single season, largely forgotten by all but the most devoted fans of the era. Today, it stands as a curious reminder of how quickly the Globetrotters' cultural moment stretched thin, proving that even charisma can't save a muddled concept. Speed Buggy, 1973. At first glance, Speed Buggy looked like a cross between Scooby-Doo and the Love Bug. It followed a group of teens, Tinker, Debbie, and Mark, who traveled the country solving mysteries with their talking dune buggy, Speedy. With a sputtering voice and a goofy charm, Speed Buggy became the heart of the series. The show drew heavily from Hanna-Barbera's tried-and-true formulas, traveling teens, colorful villains, and weekly puzzles to solve. But unlike some of its short-lived peers, Speed Buggy gained a modest following. The car's likable personality and comedic timing gave it more heart than other knockoffs. Still, the series lasted just 16 episodes, struggling against a crowded field of mystery shows. Behind the scenes, animators admitted the show was a deliberate attempt to replicate Scooby's success while tapping into the craze for car culture and dune buggies popular in the 70s. Though forgotten by most, Speed Buggy occasionally resurfaces in cameos, appearing in later Hanna-Barbera specials or even Scooby-Doo crossovers. It may not have been groundbreaking, but its quirky charm still sputters along in the dusty backroads of Saturday morning history. Partridge Family, 2200 AD, 1974. When the Jetsons returned briefly in syndication, Hanna-Barbera wondered if the same futuristic treatment could work for another franchise. The result was Partridge Family 2200 AD, which catapulted the beloved musical family into the 23rd century. They performed concerts on space stations, dealt with alien neighbors, and lived in a world of hovercars and robots. On paper, it was an inspired blend of pop music and sci-fi. In reality, it felt awkward. The Partridge Family's charm came from its grounded human stories. Moving them into space stripped away their relatability. Fans of the live-action show found it odd, while kids, unfamiliar with the band, weren't impressed by the sci-fi spin. Behind the scenes, even the Partridge cast wasn't fully involved. David Cassidy didn't return to voice Keith, and his absence was noticeable. Critics panned it as a clumsy attempt to recycle the Jetsons while riding the fading wave of Partridge mania. Canceled after a short run, the series has largely vanished from memory. Today, it survives only as a strange footnote in both the Partridge and Hanna-Barbera legacies, a show that proved you can't always rocket a family sitcom into the stars. The Pebbles and bamm-bamm Show, 1971 to 1972. The beloved babies of the Flintstones, Pebbles Flintstone and bamm-bamm Rubble, finally grew up in this short-lived spin-off. Set in their teenage years, the show followed the duo as high school students navigating adventures with a group of friends while dealing with Stone Age gadgets and prehistoric humor. The concept intrigued fans of the Flintstones, offering a glimpse at what came after the baby years. Yet many felt the charm of the original was missing. Without Fred and Barney's comedic chemistry, the spin-off leaned too heavily on teenage antics, turning it into a prehistoric version of every teen sitcom. Behind the scenes, Hanna-Barbera tried to keep the magic alive with updated designs and catchy music. While the animation was colorful, critics argued it lacked originality, feeling like a retread of tropes seen in countless other teen shows of the 70s. Despite these flaws, it lasted 2 seasons, longer than many other spin-offs of the era. Forgotten today, it remains an odd entry in the Flintstones universe, a reminder that sometimes growing up means leaving behind the innocence that made the original special. The New Adventures of Gilligan, 1974 to 1977. The original Gilligan's Island had already cemented itself as a cult classic, so Hanna-Barbera revived the castaways in animated form. The New Adventures of Gilligan brought back most of the original voices, including Bob Denver as Gilligan, and featured the same tropical island misadventures, only this time with a cartoon parrot named Stubby. The show tried to capture the sitcom's goofy charm, but the humor felt watered down for younger audiences. Gone were the wry jokes about survival. Instead, episodes often ended with moral lessons, a trend common in 70s cartoons. Behind the scenes, producers hoped the nostalgia factor would hook parents as well as children, but animation budgets were thin, and the slapstick looked stiff compared to the live-action antics fans remembered. The addition of Stubby the parrot was particularly divisive. Many viewers saw him as a forced attempt at Scooby-Dooifying the island. Despite running for 2 seasons, the show never caught the magic of the original. Today, it's overshadowed by its live-action predecessor, a forgotten branch in the sprawling Gilligan legacy. Super Friends, 1973 to 1985. Though fondly remembered by hardcore fans, the original Super Friends often gets overlooked today compared to modern superhero juggernauts. Debuting in 1973, it assembled Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman into one team, joined by teen sidekicks Wendy and Marvin, plus their pet wonder dog. Initially, critics blasted it for being too tame. Episodes avoided violence, with heroes preferring to talk down villains or deliver moral lessons rather than fight. While younger kids appreciated the accessibility, older viewers found it dull compared to the action-packed comics. Behind the scenes, however, the show laid the groundwork for decades of superhero cartoons. It gave children their first taste of a shared superhero universe, years before movies embraced the concept. Despite weak early seasons, later iterations introduced the Wonder Twins and expanded the lineup into a phenomenon. Forgotten by casual viewers who know only today's cinematic universes, Super Friends deserves credit as the bridge between comic pages and the global superhero craze that followed. Yogi's Space Race, 1978. When Star Wars exploded in 1977, every studio scrambled to add a sci-fi twist. Hanna-Barbera answered with Yogi's Space Race, throwing Yogi Bear, Huckleberry Hound, and new characters into intergalactic racing adventures. The result was part wacky races, part space opera, with bizarre alien landscapes and comedic sabotage. The series had potential, but its chaotic mix of characters and storylines left viewers confused. Yogi didn't fit naturally into space, and the addition of too many side characters diluted the charm. Behind the scenes, the show was Hanna-Barbera's attempt to modernize their older roster for a sci-fi generation. Yet, the mashup felt forced, as if executives simply slapped space onto existing properties. Ratings fell, and the show lasted only one season before vanishing. Today, Yogi's Space Race is remembered as a desperate attempt to cash in on Star Wars mania, one that rocketed off too fast and quickly burned out in the atmosphere of Saturday mornings. Captain Caveman and the Teen Angels, 1977 to 1980. One of the stranger Scooby-Doo clones, Captain Caveman and the Teen Angels, followed a trio of teenage girls and their furry, club-wielding caveman sidekick. Captain Caveman, thawed from ice, had super strength and a magical club capable of pulling out bizarre gadgets. The show became popular for a short while thanks to Caveman's wild catchphrases and slapstick antics. But despite 3 seasons, critics dismissed it as shallow and repetitive. The Teen Angels never developed unique personalities, and the mysteries were formulaic, relying heavily on Captain Caveman's chaotic bumbling. Behind the scenes, the creators saw Caveman as a parody of superheroes mixed with Scooby-Doo's mystery-solving format. Though it briefly gained traction, it never escaped the shadow of more iconic Hanna-Barbera shows. Today, Captain Caveman is a cult figure, remembered more for cameos in later shows like The Flintstones Kids than for his original series. Forgotten by many, he lingers as an oddball reminder of the 70s experimental cartoon landscape. The Banana Splits Adventure Hour, 1968 to 1970, reruns into the 70s. Although it premiered in the late 60s, the Banana Splits reruns became a Saturday morning staple throughout the 70s. Mixing costumed characters, psychedelic music, and live-action segments, it was one of the weirdest experiments in children's programming. Fleagle, Drooper, Bingo, and Snorky hosted surreal skits that blended slapstick with rock and roll energy. For younger kids, the wild costumes and music were hypnotic. For older viewers, it was pure chaos. The show was ahead of its time in blending variety show energy with cartoon segments, influencing later formats like Pee-wee's Playhouse. Behind the scenes, Hanna-Barbera poured enormous resources into the show, even hiring Sid and Marty Krofft for costume design. Yet, without a consistent narrative, the format struggled to hold long-term appeal. By the mid-70s, it was mostly forgotten, though its theme song, Tra-la-la, would become a cult earworm decades later. Today, the Banana Splits is remembered more for its strange 2019 horror movie reimagining than its original run, proving that even forgotten Saturday morning shows can return in the strangest ways. Saturday mornings in the 1970s were filled with experiments, some bold, some bizarre, many forgotten. From talking cars to space-bound bears, these cartoons remind us of an era unafraid to try anything once. Which of these do you remember? Comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more hidden TV history.